Also mute all, and you know that you, of course, you can unmute yourselves at any time to ask a question or make a comment. Since this week, the portion that we would study this week is we detour from that because it's the holiday of Shavuot. So Shavuot, which we've been counting today, is the 48th day of the Omer. So we're 2 days away from the holiday, because the 50th day is the holiday of Shavuot, as we've been counting since the holiday of Passover. So the Shavuot then is observed here outside of Israel for 2 days, Friday and Shabbat. In Israel, it's just a one-day holiday, just on Friday. A holiday which commemorates the giving of the Ten Commandments and the Torah at Mount Sinai. So just one more person is coming in. So I thought, instead of looking at the reading that would be for Shavuot, since Shavuot is on Shabbat, that we also read selections from another book of the Bible on the second day of Shavuot, on Shabbat, the book of Ruth. So I thought we would take a look at that. So I know that you have your Eitz Chaim or whatever edition of Chumash with you, but perhaps you have the Lev Shalem nearby as well. And if you do have the Lev Shalem, then take a look at Ruth, which is in the back of Lev Shalem on page 418. If you don't have Lev Shalem, then maybe you have a Bible, not just the Torah. It has to be the whole Bible. And you'd have to look in the table of contents for where the book of Ruth is. So I know this is a surprise. It wasn't, I didn't tell you ahead of time to have that, but it doesn't matter if you don't have the book of Ruth handy. Just listen, and that will be fine as well. So let me say the blessing for study. Yes, Sumner? Oh, you have to unmute. You have to unmute, Sumner.
What is the 50 days about?
So the 50 days is connected to what's called the Omer. And Omer is a measure of grain that was brought the day after Passover, or the second day of Passover, as what's called a wave offering in the Mishkan, the desert sanctuary, later the temple in Jerusalem, to thank God for the spring harvest. But then that was connected to the holiday of Shavuot, in that because the Torah says that in the third month after leaving Egypt, the first day of that month, they camped at Mount Sinai. So the rabbis made the connection and had us focus on that connection by counting down the days from Passover to Shavuot. Shavuot means weeks, and it is 7 weeks from Passover to Shavuot. The rabbis make a connection between Passover and Shavuot, that they are interconnected. They are one lengthy, really, holiday period, because another name for Shavuot is Atzeret, which means assembly. So it is a pilgrimage festival in its own right, but it's connected to Passover because it's the third month after the Exodus from Egypt. Passover is a celebration of the Exodus, so it's interconnected in that way. So it's 50 days of counting that we do from Passover to Shavuot. So I want to talk about the book of Ruth. Again, if you have the Lev Shalem Siddur, it's page 418. If you don't have a Bible in front of you, again, don't worry about it. because we probably won't have that much time to read that many verses from the book anyway. But the Bible, the Jewish Bible as we know it. So I say this because some people might be familiar with the Christian Bible, and the order of books in the Christian Bible, especially when it in their section that they call the Old Testament, is in a different order than in our Bible. So instead of calling it the Old Testament, I always prefer to refer it as the Hebrew Bible. That's what people say that we should encourage our Christian friends to refer to the Jewish Bible as the Hebrew Scriptures, not the Old Testament, because old is in relationship to new. Old means used up, not valid anymore, and it has a value judgment to it, which in the spirit of interfaith, which I would assume, we would like to assume, that in interfaith circles, there are Christian friends would not see us as Jews as outdated and useless or obsolete, but rather just as important as other religions as well. It's important then with the names to change the name from the Old Testament to the Hebrew Bible. So that's a much better name to it. So anyway, within the Christian Bible, the book of Ruth is found next to the book of Judges, because that's the time period that the first sentence of the book of Ruth says that it's taking place. But in the Jewish Bible, the book of Ruth is found later in the Bible. So the Jewish Bible is divided into three parts: the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, the prophets, and the writings. Okay, so the Hebrew word for each of those sections: Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim. Okay, Ketuvim is the letter Kaf, Nevi'im is the letter Nun, Torah is the letter Taf. So the abbreviation, the first letter of each one, Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim, creates an abbreviation that is pronounced Tanakh. So in Hebrew, the Bible is called the Tanakh to represent the abbreviation for the 3 sections of the Bible: Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim. Okay, so Torah, we're familiar with Torah, right? Because that's what this Torah study class is all about, the 5 books of Moses. The most important of all the sections of the Bible, because of the foundation that it serves for Judaism today, right? Everything in Jewish practice today is based on the Torah. The other books of the Bible are important, but in terms of Jewish practice, it's really the Torah that is the basis for everything. Nevi'im are those sections of the Bible that are both historic and prophetic. So you have Joshua, Judges, Samuel, Kings. Those are the historical books that describe the time of the settlement of the Israelites in Israel until the Babylonians the Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem and exiled them to Babylonia. So that it's a time period from about 1300 BCE to 586 BCE. So we're talking 800 years of time described in Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings. Okay, then you have other books of the prophets. You have Jeremiah, Isaiah, Ezekiel, 3 major prophets, each book more than 40 chapters long, and then 12 so-called minor prophets, minor only in that their books are smaller. Some, like Obadiah, is only 1 chapter long. Some, Hosea, 12 chapters long. So they range from 1 chapter to 12 chapters long. Okay, and they also, those prophets are taking place within the time mainly of when there are kings in Israel. So from the time of King David until the exile to Babylonia, so we're talking about 1000 to 586, so about 450 years of time, the prophets, that's what the prophets describe. Okay, then you have other books in the third section of the Bible called writings, which some of them are based in a historical context, but some of them are just independent and talking about religious concepts, like the book of Psalms, 150 Psalms, not really historical in context, but more religious in nature, odes to God and reactions to feelings that we have about the world around us and God in our lives. So that's Psalms. Book of Job, again, not historical in nature, but a book about suffering. Proverbs. So these are the first three of the books of the writings. Proverbs is ethical, moral teachings about how to be a good person. Book of Proverbs, nothing historical about them. And then after those three, then you have a section called the Five Scrolls. Okay, and that's with this lengthy introduction, that's where we get to the book of Ruth, or as it says on the top of 418 in Lev Shalem, the scroll of Ruth. Okay, because it's the five Megillot, the five scrolls. So these five scrolls are read in synagogue over the course of the year. At most of them at holidays, one on a fast day. So if we go in order of the Jewish year from Rosh Hashanah, you have the book of Ecclesiastes, which is read at the end of the holiday of Sukkot on Shmini Atzeret, because it's a kind of like a philosophy of what's the meaning of life. And that's the book of Ecclesiastes. Then in order of the year, you would get to the book of Esther, which we're familiar with. So that's historical, supposedly, about events that occurred at the time of the Persian king Ahasuerus and his Jewish queen Esther, right? So that's a holiday of Purim. And then Song of Songs, a love poem that King Solomon supposedly wrote to one of his many lovers, 8 chapters in erotic detail. So that's read on the holiday of Passover. And then we have, I'm skipping Ruth for a second, then we get to the book of Lamentations, which is 5 chapters of a religious response to the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem by the Babylonians. Okay, so that's 5 chapters read on the fast day in the summertime known as Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of Av, which was the day on which the first temple in Jerusalem and also the second temple destroyed by the Romans. Okay, so those are 4 of the 5 scrolls, the 5th one being the scroll of Ruth. So Ruth, 4 chapters long, the very first sentence, in the days when the judges ruled. Okay, so that's why in the Christian Bible it's placed next to the book of Judges, but in our Bible, because it's considered these 5 scrolls, it's at the end of the Bible in the section known as writings. So I want to share with you an introduction to the book of Ruth. Some of us might be familiar with some of it if we're in services on Shavuot. It'll be chanted on Shabbat this year. It's always chanted on the second day of Shavuot. Tina Levin is going to be chanting selections from it. We never read the entire 4 chapters. She'll read a few selections from it. So I want to read you this introduction. There's the Jewish Publication Society came out with scholarly introductions to different books of the Bible, and this one is the commentary on the book of Ruth, edited by 2 scholars, Eskenazi and Frimer Kensky. And Frimer Kensky passed away before this was published. So Eskenazi refers to her in throughout the commentary. So I just want to share with you just what this introduction, the introduction, and then we'll read a little bit from the book. No story in the Bible demonstrates more fully than the book of Ruth the extraordinary power of love channeled as chesed, kindness or generosity that goes beyond the expected obligation. Okay, so first thing to say about the book of Ruth, it's a book about compassion, and we'll see a little bit of that from what we'll read in a few moments. No book better models what it means to love the stranger and what it means to demonstrate chesed in a way that not only repairs a ruptured family history, but also creates a community into which one wants to bring a child. Read on the holiday of Shavuot, which commemorates the giving of the Torah at Sinai, Ruth provides insights and sensitivities that frame a Jewish interpretation of the Torah. And I'll talk more about that on Shavuot itself, about the connection of chesed with the giving of the Torah. Okay, so that's just my tease for something I'm going to share on Shavuot itself in a few days. The Scroll of Ruth is a book about kindness and audacity, about kindness that propels people to act audaciously for the sake of others. It's a book filled with chesed and chutzpah. Such actions bring about redemption, a notion that in the book of Ruth expands from the personal fortunes of specific individuals to the larger thematic arc of biblical narrative in which reconciliation reverses legacies of conflict and alienation as between Israel and Moab. You know what? I'm going to stop here and let's just get into the book itself. So again, if you have Lev Shalem, I'm going to be reading from page 418. If you don't, if you have another edition of the Bible there, find the book of Ruth there, and you can follow along, or just listen as I read. I want to try to see how much of the first page we can get to. Vayehi bimei shefot hashoftim. Oh, we should also know that when the book is chanted, it has a special tune that is different from the Haftarah tune, and it's different from the Torah tune. So it's a tune that is also used for Song of Songs and Ecclesiastes. So it's a special trope. So the cantillation marks are the same. It's just when you sing the cantillation marks, it's done in a special way for the book of Ruth. So for example, let me just sing the first verse for you so that you hear how different it is. Vayehi bimei shefot hashoftim, vayehi ra'av ba'aretz, vayelech ish mi beit lechem Yehuda, lagur bistei Moav, hu veishto ushenei vanav. Okay, Tina is going to do it a lot better than I, and but that's a sense that it doesn't quite sound like a Haftarah, like the Haftarah, right? So and now I can't switch in my head for you if I were to sing it like Haftarah. Bimei shefot hashoftim, vayehi ra'av ba'aretz. So that's what it would sound like if it was Haftarah, right? And Torah would be Amen. Vayehi bimei shefot hashoftim, vayehi ra'av ba'aretz. Right, so that's how Torah sounds. So you see, there's a difference in how each of the tropes sound. That's on purpose for that. So just when you hear the Ruth trop, Vayehi bimei shefot hashoftim, then you know it's special, and it's done specially for the three pilgrimage festivals when Ecclesiastes, Song of Songs, and Ruth are sung. Okay, so Vayehi bimei shefot hashoftim, and it came to pass, or it was, or once upon a time, we could even translate it like that. Once upon a time, in the days when the judges were judging. All right, so the period of time of judges would be from about 1200 BCE to about 1000. Okay, so for a 200-year period is when judges ruled in this time frame in which the Israelites were settling into the land of Israel and not quite completing the command from God to annihilate the indigenous Canaanite population. Okay, so in Bible class on Friday mornings, we're reading the book of Joshua, and it seems as if the Israelites had, in lightning strikes, were able to annihilate many Canaanite towns. But it's also clear in Joshua that they didn't do it so completely, and there's still Canaanites around, and that's one of the elements of the Jewish Bible is the consequence of not following through on that commandment to annihilate the Canaanite population, and that instead we have influence of Canaanites on Israelite society. So in that time of judges, this is before there were kings, the people of Israel were not quite united, and you had judges springing up in different parts of the land of Israel. You had Samson, who was in the north, you had others who were in Judah in the south, and other judges throughout that time. Okay, so sometime during the time of the judges, Vayehi Ra'av Ba'aretz, there was a famine in the land. Okay, Vayelech Ish mi Beit Lechem Yehuda, and a man went from Bethlehem in Judah, Lagur Biste Moab, to live in the fields of Moab, or in the steppes of Moab. Who the Ishto Ushne Vanav, he, his wife, and his two sons. Okay, so this is the setting for the book. It's the time of the judges, supposedly. The introduction here, so scholars suggest the book of Ruth was written really 600 years or 700 years after the book supposedly says it took place. So scholars think because of the style of the Hebrew and the language that it was written in the Persian period. So around 500 or 400 BCE. And again, Judges is 1200 to 1000 BCE. Okay, so if you can just Google Book of Ruth, when it was written, and if you want a scholarly article, there'll be plenty that will come up. Okay, so supposedly there was a famine, and this man who's married has two sons. They leave to go to Moab to survive. Now, what do we know about Moab? Moab is an archenemy of Israel. Moab in the Torah did not allow the Israelites to go through their territory, and in fact threatened to wage war. And there's a whole section, the portion Balak in the book of Numbers, describes how the king Balak of Moab hires a prophet, Bilam, to curse the people of Israel. Instead of fighting them, he thought, okay, let's use this prophet to curse them, and my troubles will be over because Israel will disappear because the prophet will curse them. And instead of cursing them, the Torah describes God uses the prophet to bless the people of Israel. Okay, so Moab is seen as an arch enemy at that time, and we're told that we're not allowed to intermarry with Moabites. Okay, Israel and Moab are such enemies that an Israelite is not allowed to marry a Moabite. Okay, so we have to know that as when we see the word Moab and referring to that ancient land from the time of the Torah and the Bible, we have to know, And another thing about the origin of Moab. Moab and Ammon are two nations next to each other on the other side of the Jordan River, like around the Dead Sea area. So look to the other side, picture the Dead Sea in your mind's eye, the other side of the Dead Sea where Jordan is today, and south, that is Ammon and Moab. And they, according to the book of Genesis, they are the children of Lot and his daughters, who, after Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed, they hid out in a cave, thinking that they were the only ones left in the world. Lot's daughters get their father drunk, and each one, 2 nights in a row, sleeps with their father. And the Genesis describes that they each got pregnant from their father, and one child was named Ammon, and the other one was named Moab. So not only were Ammon and Moab enemies of Israel, their origin story is from incest, and so that these nations not only are our enemy, but they are disgusting people they are an abomination to stay away from. Okay, so with that background, that they are an abomination, what their origin story is, they're enemies, right? They didn't allow the Israelites to go through. The Ammonites fought us, we defeated them. Moab just was defeated because Balaam blessed the people instead of cursing the people. So that's the background here. So with that background, life was so desperate because of the famine that this man, who is unnamed so far, leaves Judah to live in Moab. Life is so bad, there's no other place to live than in the arch enemy's territory in order to eke out survival. Okay, verse 2. V'shem ha'ish Elimelech, v'shem ishto Naomi, v'shem shnei banav Machlon v'Chilyon, Ephratim mi Beit Lechem Yehuda. So the name of the man is Elimelech. God is king. Okay, that's what Elimelech means. His wife is Naomi, pleasant, right? It's a common name, Naomi, in English today and in Hebrew, Naomi. So, and the sons' names, though, are not popular names. The names of his sons are, now see, the Lev Shalem does a disservice by not translating their names. It's really, really important to translate their names, because it could highlight the non-historical nature of this book, that we're not supposed to read this as history, that the events actually happened, but it's meant to be a parable. Okay, so then what are the names of his sons? Nobody would name their sons this. His names of his sons are plague and pestilence. Okay, sickness and pestilence, right? Nobody in their right mind, right? There are a lot of celebrities who have weird names for their children. Even the weird names, like what? Gwyneth Paltrow's has a child named Apple, maybe, right? Or there was a musician when I was growing up, Frank Zappa, who had a child named Moonwalker, right? So they're bizarre names that celebrities would come up with for their children, right? But nobody, even the celebrities, would not come up with a name like plague or pestilence. Okay, so and if you have that name, like, how do you walk around and live life with plague and pestilence as your name? Okay, not exactly. Hey, plague, you want to join us in a game of tag? It's bizarre, right? It just doesn't. So it's meant, because they're named plague and pestilence, it's clear then that this book is meant as a parable. Okay, so the name of the man was Elimelech. The name of his wife was Naomi. The name of his 2 sons were plague and pestilence. They were from Ephrat. They were Ephratites from Beit Lechem. Okay, so in Israel today, Ephrat is a modern town. technically in what is called the West Bank. Okay, if peace is ever reached with the Palestinians, Efrat will not be given back to the Palestinians, right? There should be like land swap. So Efrat is a major Jewish town. A lot of American, Canadian, British people have made Aliyah there. My predecessor, Rabbi Martin Halperin, may he rest in peace, his daughter lives there with her family. It's major community. So it's right outside of Bethlehem today. Rachel was buried there too, our matriarch Rachel. So they're Ephratites from Beit Lechem in Judah. Vayavou ste Moab, they came to the fields of Moab, Vayusham, and they were there. They were there for some time, that it implies. We don't know how long. Vayamat Elimelech ish Naomi. Elimelech died, the husband of Naomi. Vatishaer he ushne vaneha. And so she was left with her two sons. So we don't know how long they were in Moab for, but he dies, so Naomi and her sons are left behind. Vayisulahem nashim Moaviot. And she Vayisulahem, they got for themselves women or wives, Moabite women. Now, what did I just say a moment ago? Israelites are not supposed to marry Moabites. But here, Israelites are marrying Moabites. Now, this is, hopefully we'll read the end of the book to see the impact of this statement. But just remember that. We're not allowed to marry Moabites. They are marrying Moabites. Okay, so they're all Jewish, right? Well, they're Israelites. They're not technically Jewish yet. No, they are Jewish. They're from the tribe of Judah. That's why we're called Jews, because we're from the tribe of Judah. Okay, so they are Jewish. They're Israelite Judahites, and they marry Moabite women. Okay, Shem ha'achat Orpah. One woman's name was Orpah. The Shem ha'shenit Ruth. The name of the second one was Ruth. Vayeshvu sham ke'eser shanim, and they were there for 10 years. We don't know how long they were there before, but after they married, they were there for 10 years. Vayamutu gam shnehem, and the two of them, that is the two sons, also died. Machlon v'chilyon. Machlon and chilyon, disease and pestilence. Then you wonder why they died with having names like that, right? It's kind of like you are, by naming your children disease and pestilence, plague and pestilence, you are foreshadowing their death. And here they are, they died after 10 years of living there. Vatishaer ha'isha mishne yeladeha umeisha. So then the woman, Naomi, was left behind from her two sons and from her husband. Okay, so there are no children. Machlon and Chilyon marry Orpah and Ruth. They are there for 10 years, married, no children. You also wonder, disease and pestilence, you wonder why they didn't have children either. Okay, so no children. So all that's left are widows. Now, Naomi, Ruth, and Orpah are left as widows. And in ancient times, that's the worst thing to be. A childless widow is lost. And the only option for a childless widow is either to marry the brother of your dead husband, or to go back to your father's house, if your father would have you. So you're kind of betwixt and between, not sure where to go. You're stuck as a woman, as a widow, right? Your life is not in your hands. You are not in control of your life. forces beyond your control take over your life. So Naomi could go back to Judah and find Elimelech's brother, if he has one, and she could marry Elimelech's brother. Ruth and Orpah, what can they do? They're Moabites. Moabites don't really have the right to, well, first of all, Machlon and Chilion are the only two. They don't have brothers. There are no other brothers listed here that Ruth and Orpah can marry instead when Machlon and Chilion die. So this is the situation which leads then to what is the conversation that happens next. What is left for Naomi to do with her daughters-in-law? Vatakom hi v'chaloteha, so she got up and her daughters-in-law. Vatashov mistei Moav, ki sham'a bistei Moav, ki fakad Adonai et amo latet lahem lachem. So they returned from the fields of Moab because she heard in the fields of Moab that God remembered his people to give them bread. Right? The famine is over in Judah. Vateitzei min hamakom asher hayata shama. She went out from the place where she was there, and her ushtei chaloteha ima, and her two daughters-in-law with her. Vatelachna vaderach lashuv el eretz Yehuda, and they were set out on the road to return to the land of Judah. So Naomi says, I'm a Jewish woman, a widow in Moab. Life is not going to be good for me here. I don't have family here. I'm going to return. And her two daughters-in-law, who also say, not sure how we're going to be treated because we married Israelites, how we're going to be treated by our Moabites families, we'll start walking with Naomi and see what happens. Vatomer Naomi lishtei chaloteha. Naomi says to her two daughters-in-law, Lech na shovna isha levet ima. Go return each woman to her mother's house, not her father's house, to her mother's house. Ya'as Adonai imachem chesed. God should do with you chesed, loving kindness, compassion. God should be compassionate on you. So she's invoking the Israelite God in talking to these Moabite women who are her daughters-in-law. Go back to your mother's homes. God, my God, should have compassion on you. Kasher asitem im hametim ve'imadi. As you have shown, God should be compassionate to you, as you have shown with the dead ones and with me. What compassion did they show the dead ones, their husbands? We have no idea. Maybe staying with them for 10 years without having children. That's an idea. That's a Jewish concept. According to the rabbis, if a husband and wife don't have children together after 10 years, then that's grounds for divorce. Okay, the purpose of getting married for the rabbis is to fulfill the very first of the 613 commandments, to be fruitful and multiply. So if you can't do that in 10 years, then that's grounds for divorce. This is before, obviously, in vitro fertilization or surrogacy or adoption or anything. Well, there was adoption, but before any of those other scientific methods, right? So you have another example of Abraham and Sarah being barren for quite some time as well, from Genesis, but here 10 years, right? So maybe the compassion that Orpah and Ruth showed their husbands, Machlon and Chilion, was that they stayed married. They didn't complain about being barren. Maybe it was their fault. Maybe it was their husband's fault. The people couldn't tell in that time whose fault it was as to why they were without children. So God should be gracious, compassionate to you, Naomi says, as you were compassionate to the dead ones and with me. Yitain Adonai lachem, God should give you or should bless you, umitzena menucha, and you should find rest. Isha beit isha, each woman to her woman's household. Vatishak lahen, and she kissed them. Vatisena kolan vativkena. And they raised their voices and they cried. Vatomarnala, they said to her, Ki itach nashuv la'amech, we'll return with you to your people. Vatomer Naomi, Naomi said, Shovna v'notai, return, my daughters. Lama telachna imadi, why should you go with me? Ha'od li vanim b'me'ai, do I have more children in my womb or in my guts? V'hayu lachem lanashim, that they should be husbands to you? Right, so that's what I said. In Israelite tradition, if there is a widow without children from the dead husband, the widow has to marry the dead husband's brother and have a child with that dead husband's brother, and that child will count as the child of the dead husband legally, and not be the child of the new husband, the brother. Subsequent children will be the brother's children, but the first one is a replacement for the dead husband and is the heir to the dead husband. All of those are the levirate marriage rules. So that's why Naomi is saying this. The levirate marriage, you'd have to stick around for 20 years, 18 years, until I would have a child who would be eligible to marry you. And I'm too old even to have a child. So what are you sticking around with me for? Naomi is saying. Right? Shovna v'notai, lechna ki zakanti miyot leish. Return, my daughters, go, because I'm too old to be taken by a husband, right? To be married again. Ki amarti yeshli tikva, because I said I have hope. Gam hayiti halayla leish v'gam yaladati vanim. That do I have hope that this at tonight I'd meet a man and I'd have children, right? Halahen tesaberna. Halahen. So this is translated: should you on their account debar yourselves from marriage, right? So would you give up any options to wait for these imaginary children that might happen? Adasher yigadlu, until they grow up. Halahente agena levilti helyot leish. Should you this is the debar yourselves from being married? Al benotai, don't, my daughters. Ki marli ma'od mikem, I would be so bitter because of you. Ki yatzavi yad Adonai, because Adonai has struck out against me. So a very poetic, very eloquent, very articulate, impassioned talk by Naomi. I can't provide for you. I can't. There's nothing. I have no answers for you. Vatisena kolan vativkena od. They raised their voice and cried more. Vatishak Orpa lachamuta. Orpa kissed her mother-in-law. Verut davkaba, and Ruth clung to her. Vatomer hine shava yevimtech el ama. And she said, your sister-in-law has returned to her people. El ama ve'el Eloheha shuvi acharei yevimtech. Your sister-in-law has returned to her people and to her gods. Go after her. Right? So, in other words, we're supposed to understand from here that Orpah kissed and said goodbye. And Naomi is saying to Ruth, who is clinging to her, follow Orpah, do what she's doing. Vatomer Ruth. I read all this for the sake of this. Vatomer Ruth al tifki ivi. Ruth said, don't harm me. La'ozveich. Don't implore me to leave you. Lashuv me'acharayich, to leave you behind. Ki, rather, el asher telchi elech. Wherever you go, I will go. Uva asher talini alin, wherever you sleep, I will sleep. Amech ami, your people is my people. Ve'elohayich Elohai, and your God is my God. Okay, so this in later rabbinic tradition is seen as a declaration of conversion to Judaism. Many converts to Judaism today, female converts, see Ruth as the model for conversion with this statement here, Elohayich Elohai, your God is my God. Ba'asher tamuti amut, wherever you die, I will die. B'sham ekaver, and there I will be buried. Ko yaseh Adonai li, such should God do to me. The Cho Yosif, and should add on, Ki amavet yafrid beini uvenech. Only death will separate me from you. Okay, now, in the 14 minutes we have left, the story goes on. Okay, Ruth and Naomi go together back to Judah. Remember, the idea of someone from the family to marry to carry on the tradition of the family. So they meet Boaz, who is a wealthy landholder, who happens to be a distant relative of Elimelech. And so he has the right to marry Naomi or Ruth. So Naomi arranges it. They end up in his field. Boaz allows Ruth to follow the harvesters, right, to gather up whatever the forgotten sheaves, which is a Torah law, right? You're allowed, if anything falls out of your hands while you're harvesting your field, whatever falls down is the right for the poor to take. So he allows Ruth to be there to gather food that way. And he has an encounter with her one evening, she sleeps at his feet, which is the G-rated version that the book of Ruth has for us. And then Ruth tells Naomi encouraged Ruth to do that. And then Boaz goes to the elders of the town and wants to marry Ruth. Again, a Moabite, wanting to marry a Moabite. And then the elders of the town say, okay, because he has the right of redemption, the right of the levirate marriage. And then here is, Boaz and Ruth have a child. And I want to go to 422, the last several verses, and hopefully we'll have a time then for me to put this all together with the lesson about Moabites and the progeny. So we're the second to last paragraph in 422. It's like the last couple of sentences of chapter 4. Vatikach Naomi et hayeled vatashitehu becheka. Naomi took the boy and nursed her in from her bosom. Vatahilo leomenet, and she became a nursemaid. This is the same woman who said, "I'm too old to get married and have children." Miraculously, she becomes a nursemaid to her grandson. To her grandson. Technically, though, is he the grandson of Naomi? This is the daughter-in-law who has a new husband, but I guess it's a new husband who is related to her Naomi's husband's family. Is it so? Maybe not biologically a grandson, but considered a grandson. But tikrena lo hashachenot shem lemor. The neighbor women called him a name. Yulad ben Naomi. A son was born to Naomi, even though it's Ruth's child. She's Naomi's nursing it, so that all the women are saying it's Naomi's child. But tikrena shemo Oved, and they called his name Oved, who Avi Yishai Avi David, who Oved becomes the father of Jesse, Yishai, and Jesse becomes the father of David. Okay, and now here's a chronology or a genealogy. We don't need to see the whole genealogy, but we need to understand that David, this is none other than King David. King David is descended from this story. So the story is all about Naomi and Ruth, and the child that Ruth produces through marrying Boaz. That child, Oved, becomes the grandfather of the future king of Israel, King David. Okay, so I said Moab is the archenemy of Israel. We're told in the Torah, you're not supposed to marry a Moabite. Not for several generations worth. You're not supposed to marry a Moabite. And here is a marriage of a Moabite to a person from the tribe of Judah. And not only is that written about, but that marriage produces the future king of Israel, from whom the Messiah comes. Right? We pray for the Mashiach ben David, the Messiah descended from David. Right? So the Messiah is none other than descended from this forbidden union of a Moabite woman and an Israelite man. So how did the rabbis reconcile this? So they said, the rabbis first say that Samuel, that is the book of Samuel, he was the last of the judges. They say Samuel wrote the book of Ruth in order to teach the new interpretation that Samuel teaches. The rabbis say that Samuel has the right to do that because he's a rabbi. There were no rabbis in the time of the Bible. There were rabbis in the time of the rabbis. The rabbis wanting to say that, hey, we are not new to the Jewish community. There are rabbis before us, and all the prophets were like teachers of Torah, and the kings were like teachers of Torah. So the judges were teachers of Torah also. So Samuel taught, the Torah teaches no marriage with Moabites. It's only Jewish women with Moabite men that's forbidden. What's permitted is Israelite men with Moabite women. And since that's permitted, Samuel said, then it's okay. There's nothing wrong with what happens in this book. And in fact, I'll write a book to teach how this is okay. And I'll teach it so that we learn about the origin of who David is. That none other than David, the one who traditionally wrote all the Psalms, the one who is the ancestor of the future Messiah, the best, the holiest of all the kings of Israel, descends from a Moabite woman. So that is perhaps why the book of Ruth was written. But I'll talk on Shavuot morning, on that Shabbat, about a different reason, about why it's read on the holiday of Shavuot, what Chesed has to do with the holiday commemorating the giving of the Torah. But perhaps you can derive the lesson yourselves for what I'm going to say. But still, the lesson here, the most important thing for us to derive from this book, because the book ends with this genealogy, is to show that David is a descendant from a Moabite woman. Any questions or comments about this?
Just a clarification.
Yes, Laurie.
Why would it be okay for a Jewish or Israelite man to marry a Moabite woman, but not the other way around?
Right, because the Torah says you're not supposed to do it at all. And here we have a story of where it's done. So because of the story of how it was done, then we have to learn, well, it's not a blanket prohibition of all kinds of intermarriage. We're only going to prohibit a Jewish woman, Moabite man, but we will not prohibit Jewish man with Moabite woman.
But was there a rationale?
The rationale was, in the time of the Bible, your tribal status went through the father. So the child of a Jewish man and a Moabite woman, or an Israelite man and a Moabite woman, the child would still go to the tribe that the Israelite man came from. The reverse would not be true in biblical times.
Right, and that changed later.
That changed in rabbinic times. It's the mother who determines the religion of the child, right? Jewish mother, Jewish child. Mm-hmm. Non-Jewish father, non-Jewish mother, non-Jewish child. Unless they convert.
It just sounds a little messy.
It is very messy, and that's the whole point of the book. It's messy here because, and now the question is, did David really have Moabite ancestry? And therefore, this is the story that kind of tells about the Moabite ancestry. Or did whoever put the Bible together want to teach, maybe we want to teach that even the most outside of people, the most marginalized people in society can have or could aspire to greatness and sanctity and could be considered among the greatest of the people, right? So I think there could be that lesson. The child of a Moabite union could be the most marginalized in society. And they were poor too. They were subject to the famine. They were subject to the kindness of Boaz. So here are these marginalized people, but yet out of this marginalized segment of society comes none other than a future king of Israel and a future Messiah. So I think that is also a lesson for what the Bible is trying to teach, that everybody in society, or let's say it this way in a positive, that nobody should be marginalized. Everybody is considered equal by God. Any other thoughts or comments? All right, so wish everybody a good rest of the day. This is our last Torah study for the summer. And we will meet again in September. The first Wednesday after Labor Day will be when we'll resume with our Torah study on Wednesday mornings. So have a good rest of the day and a good summer, and hopefully we'll see you in shul.
Yasher Koach, Fiona.
Sure,
Okay.
Thank you.
Have a good day, everybody.